Hey, what's up guys, Klein here. So for today, we're gonna talk about a very exciting new archetype for BT07, which is the X-Antibody. So finally, the full mix of BT07 is finally out, and it really is such an exciting day because I really wanna try different builds for different archetypes for BT07. One of the new archetypes I really want to try on BT07 is the X-Antibody deck, wherein they actually printed some supports for the X-Antibody build because now not only we have Alpha 1, we also have a new level 6 Digimon for the X-Antibody deck. So let's start off with our new Digitama. We have the new BT07 X-Antibody Digitama, which is Doraemon. So Doraemon, his effect is once per turn whenever it's our turn. When one of our effects places a Digivolution card under this Digimon, we get to draw one card. So once I've discussed the other X-Antibody cards on this deck, it would finally make sense why Doraemon's effect is like this. Next on our Digitama list is the single copy of Pagamon. So I only included Pagamon because this time I really want to have as much Digitama as I have on this deck. And Pagamon is like the second best option for this X-Antibody archetype. So what Pagamon does is, on deletion, we get to reveal the top card of our deck. And if it is a black Digimon card, we can place it onto our hand. Otherwise, we place it onto the bottom of our deck. So all of the Digimons on this deck is actually black. So most probably, almost 100% of the time, we would trigger Pagamon's effect. Okay, now we're moving on to our rookies. We have first the 4 copies of new X-Antibody level 3, which is Doraemon. So what Doraemon does is, on play, we get to reveal the top 3 cards of our deck, and then we get to add one Digimon card with X-Antibody in its type, and one Kota Domoto card among them into your hand. So Kota Domoto is the new tamer for the X-Antibody deck, and later we would see what he does. Doraemon has the ESS wherein once per turn, whenever it's our turn, whenever we place a card under this Digimon's Digivolution card, we gain 1 memory. So as you've noticed, it almost has the same effect as our Digitama, but this time we gain 1 memory from that effect. So as I've said before, later on I will discuss why most of the X-Antibody line actually does this kind of effect. Okay, next on our rookie list, we have the 4 copies of Tsunaritsamon promo cards. So I included Tsunaritsamon promo card because first, almost always I would reach the 13k DP whenever it's my turn. So his ESS, which is whenever our black Digimon has 13k DP or more, we get Sec +1, will probably trigger. So as a bonus, another effect of Tsunaritsamon is that on our turn, all of my black Digimons with 13k DP or more can gain piercing. So if for example, my Alphamon, whenever it attacks and it has 13k DP and Tsunaritsamon is also on the field, Alphamon gets piercing. So we won't be the opponent's blocker wouldn't be that problematic since now we can just pierce through their defenses. Okay, next on our rookie list, we have the 2 copies of Chumon. So Chumon is just the basic memory stopper for black. And having this memory stopper is really good against the current meta right now because there are tons of memory gain effects that are non-tamer based. That's why I included 2 copies of Chumon. Next is the 3 copies of our Chukurimon. So Chukurimon, what he does is whenever it is one of the best security checks that you can have, especially with the new Adamon from BT07 having the ESS of your opponent having some free delicate planned effects. So what Chukurimon does is, whenever our opponent security checks our Chukurimon, we can digivolve one of our opponent's Digimon. So Delicate Plan and the new BT07 Adamon can prevent the security effect of Chukurimon because he's not an option card. Let's move on now to our level 4s. First, we have the 3 copies of Dark Tyrannomon from the ST deck. So Dark Tyrannomon is here because first, it only costs 1 to digivolve, and we always want that 1 cost to digivolve level 4. And secondly, he is a blocker. So you can probably play Tankmon instead of Tyrannomon if you want to grow aggressive on the early parts of the game. But for me, I think having that like third Tyrannomon blocker is such a good thing, especially whenever your opponent is like rushing his rookies onto onto your security pile. So having that Dark Tyranno blocker will slow them down for a bit. Okay, next on our level 4 list is the 4 copies of Nanimon. So I included Nanimon because first, he is such a good card. Whenever our opponent just security checks our Nanimon, we can play him onto the battlefield without paying his cost. So it's like a poor man's Zwart defeat in a sense. And another thing is that Nanimon only costs 3 to hard play. So if we are kind of breaking on our rookies, we can just hard play Nanimon for 3. It's almost as the same memory as most of the rookies on this game. Okay, next on our level 4 list, we have the new X-Antibody level 4, which is Dorugamon. So what Dorugamon does is, whenever we have an X-Antibody on our ESS on our opponent's turn, Dorugamon gets the blocker effect. So he is kind of like a pseudo second blocker for this deck, which means that our opponent can't really aggro out his way onto our security pile. Another thing is that he has an ESS wherein on all turns, while this Digimon has the X-Antibody trait, it gains plus 1000 DP. So most of our level 6s are X-Antibody, so which means it can just buff up our level 6s even though it's on our opponent's turn. Okay, now we're moving on to our level 5. We have the 4 copies of another X-Antibody card, which is Dorugamon. So what Dorugamon does is, whenever we Digivolve him, we can put 1 black card with X-Antibody on its type from our hand onto the bottom of its Digivolution cards. And if we do that, this Digimon can't be deleted by effects, so it can't be targeted by Gaia Force or other shenanigans which just straight up delete our Digimon. And its DP can't be reduced until the end of our opponent's next turn. So Dorugamon has this pseudo protection from those kinds of removal, and as I've said before, if you've noticed, we get to put 1 block card with X-Antibody and its type onto our Digivolution source, which kind of combos out with our level 3 Dorumon and our Digitama. So now, whenever we Digimon Dorugamon and we have the perfect evolution line for the X-Antibody, we get to draw 1 card and gain 1 memory at the same time. It is really important because even though Dorugamon costs 3 to Digivolve, it is now a pseudo 2 cost if we have the X-Antibody level 3. And not only that, it has some kind of protection even though if we move it out onto the battlefield. So Dorugamon is such a great card generally for this archetype. Another thing is, as a bonus, Dorugamon also has the ESS wherein while this Digimon has the X-Antibody type on its, has the X-Antibody type, this Digimon gains security plus 1 attack. So if you have noticed, there are a lot of cards here on my deck list which gives me security plus 1 attack because I really want to put tons of pressure onto my opponent, especially we can have piercing with our Sonoritsamon. Okay, next on our level 5 list is actually a flex spot, so if you want to change it, it's up to you, but I included Volcanomon. So what Volcanomon does is, again, I included another card wherein my Digimon gets security plus 1 attack. So whenever our opponent has an unsuspended Digimon in play, our Digimon gets security plus 1. So it is possible for my Digimon to gain actually up to security plus 3, so that's 4 checks. And if it has piercing, our opponent just can't do anything about it. So yeah, even though this is a flex spot, I highly suggest maybe you can try Volcanomon first before trying other Digimons on this spot. Okay, finally we're moving on to our boss Digimons. First, we have the 4 copies of Alphamon from BT06. So Alphamon is kind of like included on some fringe decks back in the BT06 meta because the BT06 meta is just heavily reliant on the Bond of Friendship, Bond of Courage, and other very fast archetypes. So this time, Alphamon, which is actually an X-Antibody Digimon, finally have its support. So what Alphamon does is, first, if this gets security check at the end of a battle, we get to add this card onto our hand. And now, if we have a Royal Knight or an X-Antibody type on play, then 12 of our opponent's Digimon can't attack the players for the turn. So now we have tons of X-Antibody cards on this deck list, which means that most probably Alphamon's second skill will probably trigger. So if ever our opponent gets to security check our Alphamon and it's just a clutch card which can prevent those aggressive attacks from our opponent. Okay, next on our boss Digimon list, we have the new BT07 X-Antibody card, which is Dorugamon. So This is such a really good card for me because first, whenever it's our turn, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP for every Digivolution card it has with X-Antibody in its type. Yes, that's kinda okay. But what makes this powerful is its second skill, wherein whenever it attacks once per turn, we may place one Digimon card with X-Antibody in its type from our hand under this Digivolution, under this Digivolution, and under his Digivolution source. So, as you can see, it also combos out again with our level 3 and our Digitama X-Antibody card. But now it has an additional effect wherein if we do that effect, we can delete up to 2 of our opponent's Digimon with the play cost less than or equal to the number of Digivolution cards under this card. So if we have a perfect stack from the hatch area of our Dorugoramon, that's like a minimum of 4 cards under his source, and whenever he attacks, we can just add up another card on his source, which means now he gets to delete a 5 cost or below Digimon. This is really powerful because as the game moves on, if our opponent doesn't have any answer on our Dorugoramon, he can just stack up a lot of Digivolution sources under him, and now we can maybe delete up to 7 or 8 cost Digimons on our opponent's battlefield. So Dorugoramon is a really good card which even prevents those pesky blockers that our opponent just wanna play just in case that our Dorugoramon has 4 checks. So Dorugaramon's second ability is just straight up delete those kinds of blockers. Okay, now we're done with our Digimons. We have the new tamer for the X-Antibody archetype, which is Kota Domoto. So what Kota Domoto does is, it's really good because now the X-Antibody has its own generic memory tamer, wherein if we have 2 memory or less, we set our memory to 3. That's really good. And on play, he's like the Davis Motomiya for the X-Antibody archetype, but his skill is we get to reveal the top 4 cards of our deck and add 1 Digimon card with X-Antibody and its type among them onto our hands. So Kota Domoto is just straight up for the X-Antibody archetype, and it's just a really good card if you just wanna dig up for your boss Digimons like Dorugoramon and Alphamon, or even if you are missing some level 4 or level 3 evolution line for the X-Antibody. Okay, now we're moving on to our option cards. Of course, I've included some removals. First, we have the 2 copies of Iron Fisted Onslaught. So Iron Fisted Onslaught, what he does is we delete all of our opponent's Digimon with the highest play cost. So this is your removal for those pesky boss Digimons. And if our opponent gets to security check this, its main effect gets triggered. Another removal for this deck is the new removal from BT07, which is Brave Metal. So Brave Metal is really good because it's like a pseudo Gaia Force if we have an X-Antibody deck. If we have an X-Antibody Digimon onto our field. But the thing is, we can't actually target another X-Antibody Digimon with this option card. So if you are battling a mirror match, this card is pretty much dead because most of our opponent's boss Digimon is probably an X-Antibody. So I only included 1 copy because I don't want any dead cards on some of my games. So lastly, on our removal, we have the 2 copies of Ultimate Flare. So Ultimate Flare is really good against some Craniamon decks wherein you can't straight up delete Craniamon. So we have to Digivolve him first and then delete all those 3 costs or below Digimon. So Ultimate Flare is such a good card because not only it can delete those Craniamons, but as well as whenever our opponent just security checks this Ultimate Flare, its main effect gets triggered. You can actually argue that you can swap out some of these removals for Gilwatch Swarmer, but the thing that I don't like with Gilwatch Swarmer is that it doesn't activate on our... if our opponent does the security check our Gilwatch Swarmer, it doesn't affect its main effect, it just adds to our hands. So it doesn't really do any clutch plays. We're in a really big pinch and we just need some removals. Moving on, we have some utility option cards on this deck list. So first we have the 2 copies of Black Memory Boost. So I included Black Memory Boost because I just want to ensure that I have some smooth digivolving happening on my turn. I don't wanna break some of the levels of my Digimon. And just in case you don't have any Kota Domodo in your field and you really need that auto 3 memory on your turn because you want to digivolve until your level 6 and attack at the same turn, this black memory boots can come up clutch on those kinds of turns. Next on my utility option card is the Metal Cannon. So this is a new card for BT07. What he does is choose one of our Digimon with X-Antibody in its trait, and then we get to draw one card for each of that Digimon's Digivolution cards. So the problem with Dorugoramon is that since we are swinging every turn and we are adding more cards onto his evolution source, there would be a time that you wouldn't have, your hand cards will be really slim and you can't play anything at all. So this is a really good tech card just to refill your hand, because if the Dorugoramon, let's say, have 6 or 7 evolution sources, you get to draw 7 cards, and that's just ridiculous on any card game. In general, this is actually a really interesting archetype. I think it's not really underpowered compared to those red or blue hybrids. It's just really underrated because all of the eyes of the people are actually onto the Susanamon decks. But I think Dorugoramon is actually an underrated tier 1 deck. Well, I don't know yet, so I can't say without doing any test plays. But yeah, I think this is such a really strong archetype. And that's it for today's video, guys. If you love the deck list and love the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I also have a Facebook page at SaberKlein, and I would include some gameplay videos on the description down below. So I guess that's it for today, guys. Till next time, peace out.